Welcome to the show. And please tell me where you're watching this video. Leave your reply in the comments below. My brothers and sisters, let us begin with a brutal truth. There are leaders who wear uniforms, who command thousands of soldiers, and who pin medals upon their own chests. They speak of independence with fire in their voices. But what happens when the master pulls the leash? We recently witnessed a spectacle that should haunt every African patriot. In Uganda, a general, the heir apparent to the presidency, stood tall on the digital stage. He threatened the United States. He declared an end to military cooperation. He drew a line in the sand. And then, in less than 60 minutes, the line was erased. The threats vanished. The roar became a whimper of apology. They call this diplomacy. We call it submission. This event is not an isolated blunder. It is the perfect symptom of a disease that has kept our continent on its knees. It reveals the terrifying gap between those who merely play at revolution and those who are willing to bleed for it. Do not look away. What we are about to unravel is the anatomy of fear that disguises itself as power. Subscribe to the channel now. Stand with us as we separate the paper tigers from the true lions of Africa. To understand the gravity of this betrayal, we must first look at the man who held the match. General Muhoozi Kainerugaba is not merely a soldier in the ranks. He is the chief of defense forces of Uganda. He is the first son. He is the man widely believed to be the heir to the throne of his father, President Yoweri Museveni, who has held the grip of power for nearly 4 decades. This is a man who was born into authority, whose words are supposed to carry the weight of a nation's sovereignty. On the surface, General Muhoozi projects the image of a warrior. He is active on social media, using the platform X, formerly Twitter, as his personal battlefield. He speaks with the cadence of a revolutionary, often invoking the spirits of past liberation struggles. And on this particular day, he decided to aim his digital artillery at the most powerful target on the map, the United States of America. The spark was Bobi Wine, the musician turned politician who has become the face of opposition in Uganda. To the regime, Wine is a nuisance. To the youth, he is a symbol of a future they are denied. Muhoozi took to his keyboard and launched a staggering accusation. He claimed that Bobi Wine had not merely gone into hiding, but had been abducted by the Americans. Listen to the audacity of the claim. The general alleged that the United States Embassy in Kampala was complicit in hiding a Ugandan citizen. He painted a picture of a foreign power meddling directly in the internal security of the state. In the eyes of international law, this is a grave charge. If true, it would be a violation of diplomatic protocols so severe it could sever relations between nations. But the general did not stop at accusations. He escalated. He issued a decree that sent shockwaves through the diplomatic corridors of East Africa. He announced that the Uganda People's Defense Forces UPDEF would suspend all military cooperation with the current administration at the U.S. Embassy. Let us pause and appreciate the magnitude of those words. Suspend all military cooperation. For a brief moment, the internet held its breath. To the casual observer, this looked like an act of supreme defiance. It mimicked the language of true sovereignty we have seen rising in the Sahel. It sounded like a leader saying, "We are not a colony. We are not a vassal state. You do not dictate to us in our own home." For that 1 hour, the rhetoric was intoxicating. Muhoozi warned that any attempt by a foreign nation to smuggle Bobi Wine out of the country would be treated as a hostile act. He was drawing a line in the red earth of Uganda. He was beating his chest, daring the American eagle to cross his path. Supporters of the regime cheered. They saw a strong man standing up to Western imperialism. They saw a rejection of the neo-colonial dynamic, where African leaders bow and scrape for approval. It seemed, for a fleeting second, that Uganda was joining the ranks of those nations demanding total respect or nothing at all. But there is a fundamental difference between the roar of a lion and the noise of an empty barrel. A lion roars to warn of its strength. An empty barrel makes noise because it is hollow. While the tweets were flying and the digital applause was ringing, the reality on the ground remained unchanged. The soldiers were still in their barracks. The diplomatic cables were still humming. The machinery of dependency that binds Uganda to Washington was not being dismantled. It was merely being insulted on a smartphone screen. This was not a calculated geopolitical strategy. It was not a decision made by a council of war after weighing the costs of independence. It was a tantrum. It was the performance of power without the substance of power. The general felt invincible behind his screen. He felt the rush of engagement, the thrill of being the center of the geopolitical conversation. He had thrown the gauntlet at the feet of a superpower. But he forgot one crucial detail. When you challenge a master who holds your purse strings, you must be prepared to starve. And Muhoozi, living in the comfort of the palace, has never known hunger. The world watched. The Americans watched. And somewhere in a quiet office in Washington or within the fortified walls of the embassy in Kampala, a phone was picked up. A number was dialed. The general had made his move. He had declared war on the hand that feeds the regime. He stood on the precipice of history. Or so he thought. But the ground beneath his feet was not solid rock. It was shifting sand, and the wind was about to change direction with violent speed. He drew a line in the sand, daring the world's superpower to cross it. But sand, as we know, shifts easily with the wind. 60 minutes. 1 single hour. That is all it took for the facade of sovereignty to crumble. If history measures courage by endurance, then this episode will be recorded as a B. While the digital echoes of his threats were still reverberating across the continent, something shifted in Kampala. The silence that followed the initial outburst was not the silence of a strategist plotting the next move. It was the silence of a child who realizes they have broken something valuable. Suddenly, the tweets began to vanish. One by one, the bold declarations of independence, the accusations against the American embassy, the threats of military suspension, they were all deleted. It was a digital walk of shame. The general, who moments ago was beating his chest like a conqueror, was now scrubbing the record like a criminal trying to hide evidence. But the internet never forgets. And the humiliation was only just beginning. Soon after the deletion came the replacement. General Muhoozi returned to X, but the lion was gone. In his place stood a trembling apologist. He posted a new message, and I want you to listen closely to the specific words he chose, for they are the language of submission. He wrote that he wanted to apologize to their great friends, the United States. Great friends. An hour ago, they were abductors. They were violators of sovereignty. They were enemies of the state harboring a fugitive. Now, they were great friends. He went on to claim that he had been fed wrong information. He told the world that he had spoken with the US ambassador and that everything was now okay. He assured the public, and more importantly, his masters in Washington, that military cooperation would continue as usual. Let us dissect this excuse. Wrong information. This man is the Chief of Defense Forces. He is the son of the President. He has access to the highest level of intelligence in the land. Are we to believe that the head of the military declared a diplomatic war based on a rumor? Are we to accept that the apparatus of the Ugandan state is so incompetent that it cannot verify if an opposition leader is in an embassy before threatening a superpower? No, this was not an error of intelligence. This was a correction of behavior. The excuse of wrong information is a fig leaf designed to cover the nakedness of his surrender. It is an insult to the intelligence of every African watching. A true leader verifies before he speaks. A sovereign leader stands by his words, even when the heat rises. But a puppet? A puppet dances when the strings are pulled. In that singular hour, we witnessed the total collapse of dignity. We went from sovereignty to surrender at record speed. We went from drawing a line in the sand to erasing it with our own hands and bowing down to apologize for the inconvenience. It was a spectacle that stripped away the illusion of strength. It showed us that for all the tough talk, for all the military parades and the heavy uniforms, the spine of the leadership was made of glass. One phone call, just one firm voice from the West, was enough to shatter it. They want you to believe it was a misunderstanding. They want you to move on and forget the panic in their actions. But we must not forget, because that apology was not just a tweet. It was a confession. It was an admission that their power is conditional and their bravery is permitted only as long as it does not disturb the flow of dollars. He blamed the intelligence. He blamed the information. But the truth was not in the reports. It was in the bank accounts. Why? Why did a general who commands an army of thousands fold like a sheet of paper? Why did the son of a president humiliate himself and his nation before the eyes of the world? The answer is not found in diplomatic protocols. It is found in the ledger. It is cold, hard mathematics. You see, the roar of the Ugandan regime is funded by the very people they pretend to despise. This is the dirty secret of the sovereignty that men like Muhoozi preach. It is a sovereignty that exists only until the invoice arrives. Let us look at the numbers, for numbers do not lie. The United States provides Uganda with over $550 million in assistance every single year, more than $500 million. This money flows into health, into development, but crucially, it flows into the security apparatus, but it goes deeper. The Ugandan military, the UPDF, is not just a national defense force. In many ways, it functions as a security contractor for Western interests in East Africa. In Somalia, thousands of Ugandan soldiers fight under the banner of the African Union Mission, ATMIS, formerly AMISOM. Who pays the bills for this mission? Who buys the equipment? Who pays the allowances that keep the soldiers loyal? It is the European Union and the United States. The regime in Kampala knows this truth. If Washington cuts the wire, the lights go out. If the aid stops, the patronage network that holds the government together begins to starve. The soldiers, who are used to being paid by foreign funds, might turn their guns inward. General Muhoozi knows that without American backing, his strongman image is nothing but a costume. He cannot afford to bite the hand that feeds him, because that hand holds the keys to his inheritance. And this, my brothers and sisters, is the stark, painful difference between a pretender and a patriot. Contrast this shameful episode with the actions of a true son of the soil, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. When the West threatened Burkina Faso, when they threatened to cut off aid, to withdraw support, to isolate the nation, what did Captain Ibrahim Traoré do? Did he delete his decrees? Did he apologize to the great friends in Paris or Washington? No, he stood firm. He looked them in the eye and said, "We do not need your charity. If it comes with chains, we will eat our own millet. We will cultivate our own land, but we will not sell our dignity." Ibrahim Traoré understood what Muhoozi does not. You cannot claim to be a king while eating from another man's bowl. Sovereignty is not a hashtag. It is the willingness to endure hunger rather than swallow insults. It is the courage to say no even when the price is high. Muhoozi's deleted tweets revealed that his power is leased, not owned. He is a tenant in his own house, and the landlord just reminded him of the rent. They feed the army so the army protects them, not the people. But who holds the other end of the leash? It would be naive to think that General Muhoozi's retreat was voluntary. The speed of his collapse suggests a pressure far greater than a guilty conscience. It suggests the cracking of a whip, While the general was deleting his tweets, the machinery of American diplomacy was already grinding into gear. It was not just a matter of bad intelligence. It was a message from the top. Senior figures in Washington, such as Senator Jim Risch, the top Republican on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, did not mince their words. They declared publicly that Muhoozi had crossed a red line. Think about that phrase, a red line. It is the language a parent uses for a disobedient child. It implies that there are boundaries set by Washington that an African leader, even a future president, must not cross. And when Muhoozi stepped over that line, he was not met with negotiation. He was met with a command to heal. This incident exposes the modern mechanism of control. The West no longer needs to send gunboats to the shores of Lake Victoria to enforce its will. They do not need to stage a coup when they own the payroll. They simply remind the leadership of the consequences, the threat of cutting military aid, the threat of sanctions, the threat of isolation. These are the invisible whips that keep the neo-colonial order in place. The analyst in the transcript rightly pointed out that Uganda depends on American support for counterterrorism operations. This dependency is the very definition of a trap. You cannot bite the hand that holds your shield. And here lies the great geopolitical divide of our time. On one side, we have the old guard, represented by the regime in Uganda, who prefer the comfortable sedation of dependency. They choose to remain in the good books of the West, even if it means swallowing their pride and erasing their own words. On the other side, we have the rising stars of the Sahel. Look at Burkina Faso. While Uganda apologizes for daring to speak, Burkina Faso is rewriting the rules of engagement. When faced with similar threats, the leadership in Ouagadougou did not flinch. They understood that you cannot build a sovereign future on a foundation of foreign aid. They chose the difficult path, the path of trade over aid, the path of self-reliance. Burkina Faso is proving that the red lines drawn by Washington and Paris are only effective if you fear them. If you are willing to walk away from the table, the whip loses its power. Muhoozi proved that he is still afraid of the whip. Burkina Faso proved that they are ready to break it. The master does not need to beat the servant who beats himself, but the era of servants is ending. The master does not need to beat the servant who beats himself, but the era of servants is ending. My brothers and sisters, this story of deleted tweets and hasty apologies is more than just a momentary embarrassment. It is a mirror held up to the face of a continent. It forces us to ask a question that will define the next century of African history. What kind of leadership do we actually want? Do we want leaders who treat sovereignty as a performance art? Do we want leaders who use anti-Western rhetoric as a costume, wearing it when it suits them to rally the crowd, but taking it off the moment it threatens their personal comfort? General Muhoozi represents a generation of leadership that is caught in a dangerous limbo. They know that the people are awakening. They know that the youth are tired of the old ways. So they try to speak the language of the revolution. They try to mimic the posture of the liberator. But because their power is rooted in the very systems they claim to oppose, they will always fail when the test comes. They want the applause of the Pan-Africanist without paying the price of the patriot. But the youth of Africa are not blind. The millions of young people watching this drama unfold on their screens can distinguish between the fake and the real. They know that true sovereignty is not typed in uppercase letters on a social media app. It is forged in the silence of hard decisions. We stand at a crossroads. One path leads us back to the behavior we just witnessed. A cycle of empty threats, followed by humiliating submissions. It is a path where our leaders are merely managers of foreign interests, allowed to bark but never permitted to bite. On this path, we remain a continent of potential, forever waiting for permission to rise. The other path is steeper. It is rockier. It is the path being cut by the new generation in the Sahel. It requires leaders who are disciplined, who speak less but do more. It requires a rejection of the aid addiction that turns generals into beggars. It demands a leadership that understands that you cannot negotiate your dignity. The incident with Muhoozi serves as a warning. It shows us that if we continue to accept leaders who have no spine, we will continue to be treated as subjects, not partners. The mask has fallen, and beneath it, we see the fear. But fear is not our heritage. Courage is. The time for play acting is over. The time for choosing has arrived. The mask has fallen, and beneath it, we see the fear. But fear is not our heritage. Courage is. The story of General Muhoozi is not merely a tale of a deleted tweet. It is a cautionary tale for an entire continent. It exposes the fragility of a leadership style that is built on bluster rather than granite. It shows us that titles, uniforms, and fierce speeches mean nothing if the soul of the leader is still colonized. We are living in a time of great revealing. The old structures are shaking, and in the cracks, we see the light of a new dawn. But this dawn will not come from those who apologize to their oppressors. It will not come from those who trade their nation's birthright for a pat on the head from Washington or London. The future of Africa belongs to those who are willing to walk the lonely road of sovereignty. It belongs to the nations that have looked at the red lines of the West and decided to cross them, not out of recklessness, but out of necessity. We see this spirit alive today. We see it in the dust and determination of Burkina Faso, where the people have decided that hunger with dignity is better than a feast in chains. Burkina Faso is not just a country on a map. It is a proof of concept. It proves that when a leader aligns himself with his people, he becomes unbreakable. This is why the figure of Ibrahim Traoré resonates so deeply across the borders of Africa. He is not perfect. No man is. But Ibrahim Traoré represents the antithesis of the paper tiger. While others are busy clarifying their statements to foreign ambassadors, he is busy clarifying the destiny of his people. He does not seek to be a great friend to those who exploit his land. He seeks to be a great servant to those who farm it. We need fewer apologies and more action. We need fewer tweets and more traction. The contrast is clear. On one side, we have the humiliating silence of leaders who fold under pressure. On the other side, we have the unwavering voice of Ibrahim Traoré, reminding us that a slave who does not rebel does not deserve to be pitied. So, I leave you with this question to ponder. When the next phone call comes from the White House or the Élysée Palace, demanding compliance, demanding submission, who do you want holding the receiver? Do you want a leader who will apologize and delete the truth? Or do you want a leader who will hang up and get back to work? If this resonates with your sense of justice, do not leave. Subscribe and walk with us. This is more than a headline. It is a hinge in history. Subscribe to stand with the story.